Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab, brought to you by CPA Practice Advisor, with your hosts, Randy Johnston and Brian Tankersley.
Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab. I'm Randy Johnston with co-host Brian Tankersley, and we are so excited to have a special guest here today, Jeff Seibert of Digits. We've known Jeff for years. His reporting tool that he'd created was super, and earlier this year, he released a full-blown AI general ledger. In the last couple of weeks, new auto reconciliation. I mean, this guy's on fire, and I thought, okay, are we lucky enough to get him as a guest? And it turns out we are. So, Jeff, good day. Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab.
Well, Randy, Brian, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of our guests and listeners may not know a background on you, so it's probably appropriate if you don't mind doing a little bit of an intro.
Yeah, quick background. So I personally had no background in finance or accounting. My whole life has been tech. I taught myself C when I was 12, grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and just started building software. And so long story short, Digits is actually my third tech company. I built a business in document collaboration way back in 2007-08. We got acquired by Box. I built a mobile developer tool platform in 2011. We got acquired by Twitter. That now runs on 6 billion smartphones around the world, basically every active phone on Earth. And then at Twitter, I became head of product in 2015. And so left Twitter, started Digits in 2018. And it really came actually from that journey of building businesses and then seeing how Twitter ran internally. And what struck me was the difference in data quality between what we had on the product engineering side and what we had on the finance side. And in product engineering, you have Google Analytics, you have A/B testing tools, you have Grafana. You can see what all your servers are doing live in the moment. You can see what your users are doing. It's just incredible real-time insight. And on the finance side, as the business owner, I was waiting 2 to 3 weeks to get a black and white P&L from our accountant at the time. And I was like, something's wrong here, right? Like, why don't I have a real-time finance dashboard? And so that was the premise for Digits when we started the business. Of course, then I fell deep down the accounting rabbit hole. I read 2 textbooks cover to cover. We hired UCLA's professor of accounting to give our team a private class, talked with hundreds of accountants. And what we really learned is it wasn't the people. The people are, of course, hardworking, disciplined, diligent, really want to help these business owners, and they were being held back by software. And so that became the premise for Digits is can we build sort of the next generation of accounting software?
A beautiful bit of background. Now, our listeners know that I wrote AI on Lisp 50 years ago this year.
I love that.
So,
Amazing.
so I've been around.
Randy actually had dinosaurs roaming the earth. He had to worry about getting caught by raptors when he exited his office every day. So it was an interesting time.
But it turns out I've been doing AI for 50 years, waiting for this evolution to occur. And, Brian has a phrase that he's used is he wants accountants to get real-time data with very little real-time work.
Yes.
And we knew that was coming. In fact, when you announced the Digits GL and showed it at different events, Scaling New Heights being an example, it was clear what was going to happen here. And, so from that vantage point, I know you've got some tenets that are very near and dear to your heart at Digits. And I think it's good for our listeners to hear some of those things in terms of your fundamental core values and direction.
Yeah, so I can go through a couple of them and then we can dive in deeper, of course. The first is that AI is a tool, it's not a solution. It's a technology just like a database is, and you need to define and design the entire system to actually make use of it. And so the big difference between Digits and sort of any ledger that's come before it is actually the data architecture. And so if you look at QuickBooks, Xero, NetSuite, SAP, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they are all relational databases architected 20 plus years ago, where each transaction is a row in the database. And so when you spend money on Uber, for example, they just see UBER. They don't know what Uber is. And so this was actually our core realization back in 2018 when we started Digits, is to design it for an age of machine learning, now what everyone calls AI. You had to change the data model. And so Digits is a vector graph data architecture. Everything's an object. And so Uber's an object. Your bills, your invoices, your customers, your vendors, your transactions, they're all objects in our system. That allows our models to basically build a semantic understanding of how the money flows in each business. So that's the first one, is like how we understand data. The next I'd call out is basically extreme data privacy. So I've built my whole career around data privacy. I helped create the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma. We do not sell the data. We use it only to train the internal models. We actually are able to train firm-specific models for accounting firms. They train only on your client's data, and that really helps encode your firm's best practices. So we've gone to extreme lengths in our data architecture.
Well, it's super 3 points. And I was actually zoned off there for a minute on old database architectures because our listeners have never heard us say this in our 250 plus episodes that we've recorded, because I had the good fortune of being around the original designs of databases like IMS,
Yep,
like DB2, like
amazing.
SQL, like Sybase, and one of the original database designers in the market. And I co-authored a book together. And his way of describing this rows of data that you're talking about, it'd
Yep.
be like going up to a parking garage and taking your car apart and putting the fenders up on the fifth floor, the engine on the third floor, the body on the first floor, and then you had to reassemble the data. Now, this vector database that you're talking about, there's some attributes. And again, our listeners are pretty technically astute, but describe some of the real benefits for the listeners today on this vector database model and why this ability to identify an Uber invoice or a utility
or
invoice accurately is
or
such a big deal.
or the similarity between things.
So that, Brian, is exactly the point. With a vector graph data model, you can build a similarity understanding. And so let's say you have a business, they have an Uber transaction that's booked to ground transportation, right? When they spend money on Lyft, what happens? Right? A traditional ledger would have no idea. But because of the object graph, we can understand across our global data set that Lyft is semantically similar to Uber. And so if you have booked Uber, you know how to book Lyft, right? It's also ground transportation. And so that's probably the most concrete example I can give, but it allows you, it's hard to picture because this isn't just like a simple two-dimensional graph. This is an n-dimensional graph. This is what the deep learning models work on. And so they're able to detect really fine-grained patterns across multiple dimensions that allow them to really understand how to book the transactions.
So, with that explanation, then, Jeff, I think I would extend this to say you would understand Curb or Ola or Grab or Didi just as easily, perhaps.
I am not as personally familiar with those, but I think conceptually, yes.
Yeah, I thought that would be the case. Now, the other beautiful thing that you said earlier, which is in my mind super important, you can, in effect, I won't use the word customize, but you can recognize firms' patterns. And that tells me that you've got a multi-layered data model where we can have this global view of all data, all firms, but we don't share it or cross-pollinate it in any way, shape, or fashion. But then we have this isolated area that's about you, the firm. And I suspect you might even have the ability to be you, the user. But that I don't want to
So,
extend it too far.
Well, if you think about this, I mean, realistically, if you've got a telemarketing operation, telephone expense is a different thing than it
mhm.
is if it's an insurance company where you're just using it. It's an ancillary thing to office. And so I appreciate that this gives you a level of industry potential industry knowledge that to in context say that's here, just like if I'm doing repairs on an office and it's just my office, then that's repair and maintenance expense. Okay.
Yep.
On the other hand, if I'm a construction contractor, that's cost of sales and
Yep.
job expenses. And so even though it's the same vendor, Home Depot or Lowe's or 84 Lumber or whoever it is, it's a whole different place it goes for the reason. And so this context engine you're talking about with the vector database, this ability to figure out context is a very, very big deal.
So this is exactly right. The way we describe it is you can think of digits as a layer cake. This is how we get these different levels of context. And so our top tier models train individually on each business or each client for a firm. And so if that client has seen the transaction before, digits is effectively perfect at booking it because it knows exactly what was done for that business and it will mimic that work. Then the next tier of model is it falls back to the firm model, because a lot of firms do specialize in practice areas or different geographies, industries, et cetera, right? And it'll look at how they have treated that transaction across their other clients and then mimic that work. This is a superpower for firms onboarding new clients, because you can start a new client fresh on digits and it'll mimic the work you've done on your other clients, which is really
So
powerful.
Jeff, is it contextually aware enough that it can extract, let's say, if you've got 20 power bills for 20 different profit centers, where it can extract that account number and then assign it to the proper expense center?
So this is the holy grail we're building towards. As you know, it's all about context. If the model can get access to the context, it'll detect the patterns. And so we are basically beginning to pull in more and more detail into the model. And you mentioned our automated bank reconciliation launch a few weeks ago. So that's one of those steps. We now ingest the bank statements. And one of the big challenges for years has been checks, because right in the bank feed, you just see check 123. It's useless, right? A lot of banks now inline the images, the check images, into the statement. We can now extract the image, look at what the check was for, and then book the check. And so that's exactly the sort of journey we're on, is pulling in those cost center data, account numbers, whatever we can get from bills, invoices, et cetera, to keep making the model smarter. And then as it falls through the layer cake, it basically uses that context at each level to make the best guess it can.
Yeah, so I think a reasonable statement there might be not quite yet, but we have that on our radar.
Right, exactly. So publicly we've announced we're at 97% accuracy. And that remaining 3%, right, it gets like asymptotically more difficult to get perfect. But that's what we're racing towards, is just trying to pull in all the context we can to figure out that remaining 3%.
It's like in physics, you're trying to approach the speed of light, and it gets harder and harder every time. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Interesting you went to physics. I was going to mathematics for infinity. All right. But it's the same concept. So now, Jeff, another moving part is it's clear that, a very popular platform, Intuit, has both QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online. And one of the tricks is the desktop product has more inventory and costing capabilities, right?
Yep.
And so the most common question I was asked in the fourth quarter, and again, I've had the fortune of speaking to thousands of attendees face to face in the fourth quarter, was going to have to get off QuickBooks Desktop. What platforms can I go to? And I need inventory costing, and I'd like integrated payroll. You
Yeah.
probably heard that more times than you're gonna become an old guy with gray hair or no hair, like I'm turning into. But what's your response to that particular need?
Yeah, it's a really great question. It's obviously a super important feature for a lot of folks. Today, we don't have inventory built in. We do focus primarily on local professional services, online businesses, digital businesses, basically non-inventory tracking businesses. This has been a huge feature request and something strategically we aim to partner on. So there's some great companies in the space nowadays. For example, Katana. I would highly recommend folks check them out. And it's similar to payroll. I know Intuit has sort of gone through all of the adjacencies and tried to build them all. We would much rather partner with the strongest players in the space. So, for example, we have a great partnership with Gusto on the payroll side. And so we will likely partner with the top inventory products and do tight integrations versus trying to build that and try to be best in class at multiple things.
Understood. And I wanted to make sure that our listeners knew that demarcation, because that is one of the things that I've said about your platform really since inception. And I hope that you are so successful that you can acquire inventory costing and acquire payroll and have that same development attitude around it. So
Yep.
now we'll talk more about product along, I think a little later in our time together, but I'd like to turn our attention to your second major tenet, which was about privacy. And by the way, that was the setup with this inventory costing
Mm,
payroll partnering thing, because it's one thing to be on your own platform and control the data. It's another thing all again to use outside AI engines or outside sub-processors, which, of course, with the Intuit announcements of the $100 million partnership with OpenAI and data flowing back and forth, there's
right.
questions about where does the client data go? Now, I'm going to overstate this slightly, Jeff, but one of the tenets of a CPA license is the fiduciary protection of client data. And
Yep.
there seems to be a lot of CPA professionals that have forgotten that. And
Well,
I,
I will tell you, somebody that's taught CPA review, I will say that this is the holy grail of CPA. Okay, it's that you will not, without authorization, disclose this information to anybody for any reason. Okay,
Yep.
this categorical thing here. Okay, and this is the thing that freaks us all out because it's one of those things that the privacy is one of those things where if we don't watch it very carefully, the problem is it's all embedded in 50,000, 80,000 words of privacy policies and EULAs and everything else, and only one document has to say we do this, and they can bury it wherever they want. And so I just want to ask you categorically, are you selling information to anybody for any reason whatsoever?
No, we do not. We do not sell the data.
Okay,
This has
so
been
so it's not
super
going to be
important to me.
used to it's not going to be used to market loans to anybody. It's not going to be used to sell insurance to anybody. It's just used to process it internally, and you have separate models available for firms. So if they don't want to
Yep.
use somebody else's data training, they can't. They can, right?
That's exactly right. And so, yeah, we in our privacy policy and terms, we of course have the right to use the data internally to improve the product. That is by definition what we need to build the models and make the product better. But yeah, we don't sell the data to anyone. Where we do use sub-processors, obviously we host on Google Cloud, as does most of the internet these days. All the data is encrypted at rest. Google does not have access to it. We do have some features that require foundation model APIs. Our contracts with those vendors prevent them from using the data, training on the data, storing the data, et cetera. So we've taken this very, very seriously. And this dates back to my earlier career in mobile development. I mean, my prior company, we had access to live DAU of all the top apps in the App Store, like the crown jewels of these multi-billion-dollar companies. And so we were very serious on this from day one.
yeah, and that makes great sense because and topic for another day, but I bet you're excited about the new Google TPU 7s that they're
Yes.
rolling out for lots of reasons based on that comment. But, I would just say that over the past 18 months, but more so the past 7 months, I can make the veins stick out in the neck of a CPA professional when I suggest that the Intuit QBO not opt out problem and Intuit payroll not opt out problem. When people know about it, they're pretty aggravated and they're usually looking for another path. And because of that, I've
And
suggested that your Digits platform is another landing path.
Yep.
So this strong piece of privacy is a big deal. Now, this is a little bit of a right turn, but today, do you have a relatively good way to migrate alternate vendors' data, or is it better just to, hoover up the data from existing bank and credit card feeds?
No, so people get surprised when I say this. We will help you move off your existing ledger in about 5 minutes. And Digits will get your entire historical data, every transaction, every line item, every piece of metadata, etc. And you can pick up exactly where you left off. So there's no like multi-week implementation process or anything like that. You can sign up and get started within minutes.
Yeah, and Jeff, I'd heard you say that publicly before, but I thought it was good for our listeners to know that in the podcast here. So, what we're hearing here, friends, is kind of a 1-2 punch of some, very strong AI capabilities in this AI powered ledger paired with the right attitude around data privacy. So, the only thing I might have as a technical worry is scalability. How
Ah,
how big do you think you can grow?
this is a great question. And again, draws back to my prior company experience. So with Crashlytics today now runs on 6 billion monthly active devices, does 2 to 3 billion events a day, literally trillions of events in the data system. And so the scale of that is just unfathomable in comparison to finance. We have businesses on Digits with millions of transactions. And the core engineering team at Digits was the core engineering team that built Crashlytics. And so we designed this from day zero to be a high scale ledger. As a concrete example for that, Stripe, as you know, when you have a business running on Stripe, you get all these purchases coming in, all this line item detail. No one today is really booking that into Xero or QuickBooks. You're doing roll up journal entries in order to keep the data volume low. We have a native Stripe integration. It pulls in every single piece of data, every purchase, every customer detail, et cetera. Because if you want to be an ERP, you need all your customers and purchases in the ERP. You can't hide them behind a journal entry. That sort of destroys the whole value.
Yeah, that makes great sense in terms of an illustration because it's, well, not like Shopify, who had an unfortunate outage with the Black Friday 25 weekend.
Oh no, I actually didn't see that. That's
Oh
crazy.
yeah, they were down. No
Okay.
Shopify transactions. It's like, oops,
Yikes.
we took a little too.
That's a bad day.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real bad day. So I think on this point, I want to transition out of technical into product here in just a minute. But are there any other technical questions we should have asked you, other things that you get asked frequently, or other things that you think are core to know? Because one of the disadvantages of our podcast is I tend to be the hardcore technician and Brian tends to be the hardcore accountant. And if neither one of us were in the room, Brian would sound like a hardcore technician and I'd sound like a hardcore.
No, I love this. And I know I love your depth of knowledge in the space. I should have you on our more tech focused podcast.
Yeah,
On the tech.
it's kind of a funny deal, as I sometimes say, I slept in a Holiday Inn last night, so I think I can play an accountant.
Well, no, this has been very thorough. We touched on scalability, touched on data privacy, touched on data architecture. I'd say maybe the only other thing is the big like differentiation with Digits, and I believe versus everyone else out there in the space, is we build and train our own models. And so, yes, there are aspects where we're using the foundation LLMs that everyone is using, but a lot of the core value at Digits comes from our own model development. Our engineering team, our ML team, quite literally wrote the O'Reilly books on machine learning over the past 5 years. We've spent over 5 years training these models. And so it's not just AI bookkeeping, like how to classify the transactions. We also have our own document extraction models. Our bill pay models are incredibly accurate at pulling out all the information from your bills. And so this has been a major.
I can testify to that, by the way. I can testify to that. I put my VoIP, I was telling you earlier, I put my VoIP telephone bill into it and it pulled out the information on the vendor, pulled out their tax ID number, it pulled out their bank account information. It set up and said, do you want to pay this via ACH, which is 50 cents? It went through and did all of that instantly. And it was impressive.
I
Well,
appreciate
so to
that.
that point, building and training your own models is, impressive to start with because Brian and I both have the privilege of teaching a lot of artificial intelligence, and we talk about the frontier models and the ability to protect the data and what you have to do and so forth. And, by my count, there's 1,000+ models out there. But for example, in Open Router today, I'm running 579 models so I can run results side by side. And when I look at the new Gemini versus the Gemini Pro 3 versus ChatGPT 5.1, it's clear that Gemini has forced OpenAI into code red because they may have gone around them in this release. But then you look at what's happened with Mistral, who are clearly running on edge devices, a small enough model to run on a smartphone. This whole world of AI is something you've lived in for a while. And obviously, we've lived in it a while, watching it, trying to help you understand where you can use AI effectively with your clients and in your firms as we see it.
Yep. And what's really interesting is the open source Chinese models aren't that far behind.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine a world in a couple years where it's effectively commoditized, where you have extremely smart models that are open source and comparatively cheap to run. That'll change a lot of things.
Yeah, it will. In fact, when this was first breaking, we were recommending people run a lot of open source, the Llama models, when they were broadly available if you wanted to remain private, because you could install it and run it privately and so forth. Well, Jeff, so far, great. Let's turn attention, if we could, to the Digits product itself. And again, this is not trying to be promotional, friends. What we're trying to do.
By the way, let me say this. There is no financial relationship between Randy and me and Digits. Okay. Zero. Okay.
Correct.
We are doing this because we are interested in the technology. So let me just say that categorically at today, there is zero relationship.
And I would go a little bit further. The best I can tell, Brian and I may be some of the last surviving independent consultants to the profession because we are quite aware of back fees being taken by many that are not disclosed. And again, Brian's hair is standing up on the back of his neck because of his Becker, CPA training. The independence rules live inside his veins.
I'm not going to say categorically that I'm independent from everybody, but I will tell you that my opinion and Randy's opinion are not for sale to anybody at any price. And I say this because we're saying a lot of good things about Jeff and Digits. Okay. We do try to accentuate the positive wherever we can with everybody, but because we have been so effusive in our praise thus far, I want to make sure that everybody gets this. Okay. And you can, if you don't believe me, come look at my bank records. There's not a nickel that's come from Digits to me. Okay.
And so, I have another rule that I've used for some time. If you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all, the grandma rule. And, and I've put you a little bit on the spot, Jeff, about the, lack of costing slash inventory slash payroll. So it's not a criticism because having designed and helped build inventory and costing systems at all scales of legacy GL products, I know how hard it is to design those elements well. Uh,
Yep.
I'll just, you probably already know this, but I'm just going to say doing a GL ARAP is pretty trivial compared to doing a costing inventory bill of materials roll up. Just
Yep.
saying. Uh,
I
so
appreciate it.
yeah, so you got a way bigger hill if you go that. So that's why the third party doesn't bother me because people that understand that know how to conceptualize it. So that's
Yep.
why I want to turn attention to because I don't want to understate or overstate the capability of Digits today. And I'm just looking at what I would call the value base because where you're selling the starter at $35 a month right now, core at $100 a month, and then you have the professional edition, which is a negotiated price. Just help us understand the three levels of product, what you're
Yep.
trying to accomplish, and what we should expect that's in the product and stuff that is specifically outside the product. And that's pretty clearly enumerated in my mind on your website at digits.com/pricing.
That's exactly right. And so, yeah, what we're aiming for with the three tiers is our starter plan, $35. It's really geared towards simple businesses, solopreneurs, anyone who's sort of getting up and running and likely, honestly, has more of a tax focus. Like that's why they're sort of doing their books because their businesses are pretty straightforward. And so, super easy to get started with. You literally sign up, you link your bank accounts, cards, etc. We pull in all the data in real time, we book it in real time. Anything that the models are low confidence on, this is another advantage of predictive models, is we flag for you in the inbox. Because the worst thing we could do is make a mistake booking it to the ledger. So we just throw out anything that's low confidence. It goes to your inbox and then you can correct it. And Digits learns instantly. And so when you go and decide, hey, yes, I want to book that to ground transportation, to follow the example we've been using, then boom, it's done. And if a new transaction comes in a minute later that's similar to that, Digits will mimic what you just did. So you don't need to worry about waiting a week or a monthly close or whatever for it to learn. It learns instantly. The core plan, $100 a month, now cheaper than QuickBooks Plus, which is amusing to us, is really designed for the sort of core SMB market, folks focused on monthly accounting, working with their external accounting firms. This has been really, really well received by the market. Full power of the ledger. You have all the integrations. We support 12,000 banks, cards, payroll, Stripe, I mentioned already, Ramp, et cetera, et cetera. And so you connect everything in and you get custom reports to send out to investors. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I hated to interrupt you, but before you go on, it's $100 a month, and we have covered that also in our podcast, the Accounting Technology Lab on GL accounting. But one thing that's not listed on your website, Jeff, is number of users, because
Mm.
obviously if it's the QBO pricing at $115, that's 5 users. How many users is $100 for you?
Sorry, unlimited users. I philosophically do not believe in charging per user. And the reason is I want everyone at the business to experience digits and get to know digits. And that's how we spread by word of mouth. We've also designed digits to be very collaborative. And so part of the other benefit of this object graph data model we talked about is we have object level permissioning. And so you can share your marketing spend with your head of marketing, and they can see that live in real time. And they won't see payroll or cash balances or whatever else. You can share your T&E with your office manager, and that's all they'll see. And so when you bring that mindset to it, I don't want to charge per user. I want everyone at the company to have access to at least a part of digits so they understand the finances of the business. And to give a really concrete example, so we use it internally for digits. We have shared our software application spend, like all the SaaS stuff we use, with the entire company. Everyone at the company can see real time everything that's booked to SaaS. And that helps us stay honest on like what we're paying for, what do we need, how many seats of those products do we need, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and
Um,
see that's a beautiful thing. So, that's one thing that if users went to your page, they would not see unlimited users, which in my mind is another core benefit you have. And I think in a consultation call I did with a firm yesterday, I said, look, part of the deal on these systems is I need to have everybody using it with security bars,
yep,
because you just described the security bars and your model supports that isolation and
yep,
exposure of the data in a proper way. But, of this particular group had about 100 users in their business, and they had 17 users, and they should have had 100. Well, maybe not the
right,
janitor. Okay,
right,
99 users, on the system, but they were going to be charged in one model by user, which I
yep,
disagree with.
yep.
And in another model, it was you already own the licensing and you can use it. So with digits, friends, remember that it is unlimited users, which is another key deal here. And also, you might address, Jeff, the accountant access
Mm.
relationship as well. But I'm sorry to derail your explanation because you were doing just what you should, but it was like, I need to call out the couple of three things.
No, that this is great. And this is great feedback. I will maybe clarify our pricing page to highlight the unlimited users. Yeah, Digits is unlimited users, it is unlimited connections, and the core plan is up to 1 million transactions a year. So a massive transaction number that should serve most SMBs. And that's really the difference from our sort of professional plan. Yes, it's custom pricing. If you're doing more than 1 million transactions a year, we want to understand what your business is and how we can best work together.
Yeah, yeah, that makes good sense because having dealt with the mid-market and big ERP products, so Sage Intacct and NetSuite and SAP and Oracle Financials and Epicor, and all those large competitors, it's a different ball game,
Yep.
but when it's professional services, to me, the product almost has unlimited scale with maybe one other little caveat. Presence in foreign countries and where your data center's located and currency and all those type of things. So where are you playing in that?
Yes. So these are on our roadmap. So today, Digits is US only and single entity. We don't do multi-entity consolidation today. You, of course, can create multiple accounts and do the books. That's fine. We just don't consolidate. On our roadmap are both. So we have gotten tons of requests, as you can imagine, for foreign currency support and multi-entity consolidation. So those will be coming. I can't announce timelines yet. But today, all of the data is stored in the US in Google's US Central One, which is located in Iowa, all encrypted at rest. And so, yeah, that's sort of where we stand today.
Yeah, and just a side point that our listeners have never heard from me. During the time that the AI models were being trained in Des Moines, they used 20% of the city's water supply. So a lot of times people are thinking about power and not water when it comes to these AI data centers, but it hoovered up a bunch of water in that window. But the reason for putting Jeff on the spot on that, friends, is multi-entity consolidations and foreign currency handling, including your EU triangulations on the euro. Those are not trivial bits of code to write
Yep.
because, fortunately or unfortunately, I've had experience with all those. Easier than inventory and costing,
There we go.
harder than general ledger. Okay, so when you're weighing out your roadmap there, those are
Yep.
good places to go next because we do have a lot of international entities. But I wanted to be clear, not today. And so my Canadian listeners here, sorry, not today.
Yep.
Value added tax and all those type of things. There's so many parts on these big systems, but the core system, going back to let you get on track again, at $100, unlimited users, it's stunning how much capability is in there. And I actually had zoned off and forgotten your million transaction limitation, but cool.
Excellent.
That's a good problem to have because for context here, you're talking about a 1,200 page bank statement at 60 lines. Okay.
Yep.
So nobody, so you're getting the bank statement and it's saying ka-chunk when it hits the desk if it's in paper. So that's a big deal. So let's talk a little bit about payables. I spoke of my love for your payables engine thus far, and I want to challenge you and ask a quick question here. One of the things that some of the other tools like Maker's Hub and others do is they'll extract the detailed information for each line item on a bill.
Yes.
Are you to the point yet where you're doing that? And where does that fall in your roadmap if you're not?
Yes, so we already do that. That was actually one of the core reasons we built our own models, because as we looked across the space, was there a model we could use to do this? It did not exist. That's why basically none of the bill pay products have had line item extraction. So that's the part we built first. And so it's already in the product. If you go and you upload a bill, you can click the split line items button and it'll instantly show you the line items for you to then book separately however you want.
Cool. Very cool. Okay. And then once you map those to an item in your system, then it will always map to that item or expense in the future.
So we don't, this is great feedback. Today we don't auto split the items because we've seen most people are just booking their bills as single like bulk entries. But I think that's a great point is we should, if you are splitting the items, we should then default to split the items and then mimic how you booked them. That is great feedback I can bring to the team.
Well, the reason I think about it is, you one of your core things is franchises, and
Mhm.
if you look at that, if I think about your average restaurant, the biggest invoice they have is that biweekly delivery they get from the jobber that
Yeah.
has 500 items on it, and those all go to the same place every single time. But if you can't break out those 500, you're not for me. So cool,
Yep. No,
cool.
that's great feedback. That would be easy to do, and we would just default to splitting them and then booking them correctly.
Yeah. And so, Jeff, as we think about, there are specialty things, and I'm going to go to our first episode with you on this, where Brian specifically called out the knowledge of vertical industries. And I
Yep.
think he illustrated with dental as an example, or this one probably fits more in construction or food franchises and so forth. This type of accounting has been the domain of mid-market products because of many things. But it feels like to me, not today, but future
Yep.
roadmap, your ability to do the analysis of items it should be stunning. Again, our listeners have never heard me say this before, but I actually wrote the original Hardee's point of sale personally. And
Nice.
I was surprised, and I also did the McDonald's point of sale. So, and Taco John's and so I've been around point of sale in restaurants a long time, but I was surprised how when we were trying to do the customization of a fast food order and to analyze the calorie count and to let the person know the amount of change that they had to count out. So if it was 87 cents, we would say three quarters, a dime,
Mm.
and two pennies because the operators needed that. I guess
Yep.
nowadays we don't need the penny thing, but you got it. There's just these specialty things like rolling up the Z tape from the point of sales, and where your attitude around Square was, I want all the transactions. I can see a future vision where point of sale could also pull up all that analysis, whether
And,
it's
and
restaurant or something else.
And I think about that morphing into back office where you do the inventory accounting and the margin calculations in restaurants. And I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff here that this contextual awareness makes possible.
That is exactly right. And so you're correct. It's not a today thing, but that is definitely the vision. And our model architecture has the ability to specialize by industry type or business type. And so that would allow us to build in that direction.
Yeah, so I know we could go on for another hour without much hesitation, but I want to be cognizant that we may only have, 5 or 10 minutes left together. What other key features do you want us to know about across the Digits platform? Because again, up at the custom level, you're reporting, doing consolidation of financials, and you've already laid out you could run multiple instances of Digits to do some of that. But what are other key things that users would find surprising or
Mhm.
unexpected in Digits today, not
Yep.
necessarily roadmap items?
So today our focus is on automating as much of the month-end close tedium as possible. And so we talked about the real-time finances. You plug in your accounts, all the data comes in and is classified to the ledger in real time. There is no bank feed in Digits. There are no rules. You don't have to go and create and manually maintain rules. We automatically surface anything that the models weren't confident on in your inbox. And then as you just go through your inbox and book the items, the models are learning instantly. So that's sort of the bookkeeping flow. Then there's the reconciliation flow. We have also fully automated this. So for supported banks, there's about a dozen banks who make their statements, their PDF statements, available via API. We automatically pull those statements and will reconcile your accounts. For other banks, of course, we can't access them by ourselves, but you can drag and drop the PDF onto Digits and we take it from there. And so the document extraction models pull out every transaction in the statement, map it to your ledger, and literally reconcile to a pixel bounding box on the PDF. This is very, very cool because you can then mouse over the transaction in Digits and see it highlighted right on the PDF. So it makes the audit process just extremely fast as you go through. So that's reconciliations. Then we have a whole bunch of review tools automatically built in. So we call out all new vendors in a period. So let's say you're closing November, boom, with one click, you see all new vendors in November and you can verify how they were booked. And if there was a mistake or whatever, or something unexpected for that business. We show you all vendors and customers that have been booked across different places in the chart of accounts. Sometimes that's intentional, of course. Often it isn't. And so that makes you give you a one-click spot to clean that up. And then we do all the variance analysis, flex analysis, et cetera, for you. And we attribute everything to the actual object level details. So the vendor, customer, department, exactly, et cetera, whatever it is. And so you can mouse over marketing and be like, oh, marketing spend jumped 20%. Why? Because, well, of this transaction with Google AdWords, whatever it might be. And so you don't have to run detail reports. You don't have to export the data. You don't need to pivot it. We do all those pivots in the product. So you can just mouse over stuff and see exactly what's going on.
All right. So as you're describing these productivity tools, I'm reflecting on the need for transactional babysitting should be declining. So a misstatement that we've heard over the last 3 years since ChatGPT was released is AI is going to replace the accountant. And so the question here is, does Digits replace the bookkeeper or accountant? Do you have an advisory path? Talk to me about that kind of thinking because I could hear people thinking through the wires on this. Oh, does that mean I no longer have a job?
Right. Yeah, that is not the case. I am convinced that it is not possible for AI to replace accountants because as you well know, the profession is a profession of edge cases and judgment calls and complexities for each individual business. These models, like they can train, they can get as good as they can, but they're never going to be able to reach 100%. That's why I described it as an asymptote. What our mission is to eliminate the tedium because 90 to 95% of that work is just pure tedium that you're repeating every month, and that we can reliably eliminate. And so the way we talk about Digits is unlike QuickBooks, Zero, et cetera, you really have to use those products. You're spending hours sort of putting the data in, pulling the data out, interpreting the data, et cetera. Our goal is for you to supervise Digits. And so it allows you to reshape your role as the reviewer and obviously trainer. By doing work in the product, you're training the underlying models. and then allow you to spend way more time working with your clients on the advisory side, which, as we talk with folks, is where they all want to go. So I actually see this as hopefully a huge win for the profession, because even the folks on the junior side entering, instead of looking at a career path where they're going to be spent doing data entry for potentially years, I think this can really shorten that and allow them to really sort of accelerate their move on the advisory side and learning how to work with business owners.
Understood. And as it turns out, when we've taught people to do client accounting services, CAS,
Yep.
and notice I separate advisory because I have a completely different path on advisory. But for CAS, which I guess we've taught now 27, 28 years at this point, quite some time, we've suggested that the teams are managed in pods,
Mhm.
5 to 7 people with, some entry-level people and managers above them and so forth. And that a typical pod might be able to handle up to about 100 businesses.
Mhm.
So, 5 to 7 people, about 100 businesses. So what would be your expectation, putting you on the spot a little bit, if I'm managing clients that are running digits? How many people do I need to kind of oversee this for,
So
so what's the ratio?
yeah, so we have a concrete example of that today. There's a pod of three, I won't say the firm, but there's a pod of three using digits to manage 150 clients. And so sort of a 1 to 50 ratio there. And that's happening today. I imagine that'll keep scaling as we sort of fill out more and more of the different edge cases and steps in the product.
Yeah, I appreciate that, known facts, because again, we like to deal in the facts.
Yep.
One other twist, and it's not so much of an issue here in professional sales and services business, but how are you handling tax, sales tax, use tax type of issues?
Yeah, so we haven't gotten, that's another big feature request. We haven't built that into the ledger deeply at the moment. So right now that is being done on the more manual side. That's a perfect example of something I think we will get to next year that will then eliminate a whole nother chunk of work.
Yeah, and again, Brian and I are lucky enough. We've been around the design of all the bigs, the Avaleras and the
Yep.
Solos and so forth. And there are some products out there that do it. But here's another reminder for our US listeners. Sales tax in the US is very Byzantine.
Yep.
17 to 18,000 tax keeping jurisdictions, as opposed to value added tax, GST and so forth globally. So it's a
It's
big,
truly the death of a thousand cuts. It's kind of like Afghanistan. It's where software empires go to die, is they take on that and they take on 50 state payroll. And
Yep.
if they don't really know what they're doing and haven't really done their homework, it's a quagmire.
yeah.
That this is exactly right. And this goes back to what I said earlier. We won't build 50 state payroll. We don't intend to build the sales tax engine for the US. We're going to partner with one of the top players in the space and build it into the ledger that way.
Yeah, makes great sense. Because again, I wanted to differentiate that, Jeff, in terms of, what's in, what's out.
Yep.
Well, you have been such a wonderful guest. And, again, I've known you for a few years, and every time I've listened to you, it's like, that guy is such a good guy. So,
Well, I appreciate that, Randy. That means a lot.
but are there parting thoughts that you have for our listeners today?
This has been a really thorough overview. I deeply appreciate it. And of course, your knowledge of the space is beyond parallel. And so, no, I would just encourage folks to check it out. You can start a free trial. There's zero commitment. Hook up your accounts, either your own personal ones or for a client. A cool tip I have is literally, if you want to just try it, start a trial, hook up your personal credit card, and it'll just book everything as if you were a small business, which is pretty funny. And so you can see how the model works and like what it's doing, and then cancel the trial. So just check it out. We would love any feedback.
Jeff, that's a great recommendation. So, Brian, parting thoughts or questions for Jeff?
Jeff, I'm very impressed with what you and your team have done, and I think it is a new world that you're leading us into, and I think it's very exciting. I very impressed with what you've done thus far, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you and your team come up with in the future. Because the questions we've been asking you about things like multiple lines in an invoice and sales tax and those things, you know these are questions that we ask people that are sometimes very, very hard for people to answer, because many times they haven't even thought about it. It's very apparent that you have thought a lot about this, and you got a lot of really smart people thinking about it. And I encourage people to go and check out your work and see if they like it.
I
Beautiful.
appreciate it.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for investing your time with us today. I know your time's wildly valuable, and we are pleased to get the amount of time with you we did. So again, do start a free trial of Digits, at least give it a good run. That's our recommendation. And we look forward to speaking with you again soon in another accounting technology lab. Good day.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. We'll be back next Saturday with a new episode of the Technology Lab from CPA Practice Advisor. Have a great week.